It all started on a crisp spring morning, the kind where the city felt unusually quiet, as if holding its breath for something unexpected. Julian Blake stood before the towering windows of his office, looking out at the skyline he had conquered. The polished floors beneath him reflected his sharp designer shoes, and the scent of rich coffee lingered in the air. To everyone else, he was the picture of success, young, brilliant, untouchable. But today, Julian wasn't thinking about mergers or market shares. He was thinking about his mother. Evelyn Blake was a woman of elegance, pride, and expectations. She had built the foundation that Julian now ruled from, a queen in her own right. But she was traditional, deeply so. And lately, she had grown increasingly impatient with her son's bachelor lifestyle. Legacy means nothing without a family to carry it, she had told him during their last dinner, eyes piercing over the rim of her wine glass. That was when she gave him an ultimatum: marry before the Blake Foundation's annual gala, or she'd begin the process of transferring control of the board to a more stable successor. In other words, his cousin Derek. Julian didn't believe in love, not anymore. It had burned him once, a youthful mistake with a woman who chose wealth over warmth. He had buried the romantic part of him with that heartbreak and replaced it with logic, deals, and unshakable control. But he wasn't about to lose everything because of one demand. If his mother wanted a wife, he'd get one. She didn't say it had to be real. 2 days later, he walked into a modest cafe on the east side of town, a place he hadn't visited in years. It was quaint, filled with chipped mugs and warm laughter, a stark contrast to the sterile marble of his world. He didn't know what he was looking for until he saw her. Isla Munro stood behind the counter, hair tucked under a frayed bandana, wiping glasses with a kind of focus that suggested pride in even the smallest tasks. She didn't see him at first. She was lost in her world, one of steaming kettles, cinnamon rolls, and tired eyes that had seen too much too young. But when she did look up, their eyes met, and something strange flickered in Julian's chest. Not desire, not recognition, just stillness. She was beautiful, but not in the way magazines defined it. Her beauty was worn in, like pages of a favorite book. There was a softness in her smile, but steel in her posture. Julian ordered a black coffee, no sugar, no cream. And for the first time in years, he didn't look at his phone while waiting. When she handed him the cup, her fingers brushed his and she said, "You look like someone who doesn't drink coffee for the taste." It caught him off guard. He chuckled despite himself. "You're not wrong," he replied. Julian didn't usually do small talk, but he came back the next day, and the day after that. He told himself it was to finalize the plan forming in his mind. But the truth was murkier. There was something about Isla that intrigued him. She didn't know who he was and didn't care. She treated him like everyone else, like a man ordering a drink, not a millionaire hiding behind charm and suits. One afternoon, as the cafe emptied out and golden sunlight slanted through the windows, he made her an offer. "It's going to sound strange," he began, "but I need a wife." Isla blinked, a laugh catching in her throat. "Excuse me?" "Not a real one. Just for a few months. A pretend arrangement. You'd be well compensated." She stared at him like he'd lost his mind, which, to be fair, he might have. "I'm serious. You'd attend a few events. Look the part. Smile. That's all. No pressure, no strings." "And why me?" she asked slowly, folding her arms. Julian hesitated. The truth was, he didn't want someone from his world. They'd talk. They'd twist the story. He needed someone grounded, someone honest, someone like her. "You're real," he said simply. Isla laughed again, but it wasn't mocking. "You must be desperate." "I am." She looked at him for a long moment, the air stretching thin between them. Then she said, "Let me think about it." She did. For 3 days, during which Julian found himself unusually nervous. When she finally gave her answer, she walked into his office in jeans and a faded sweatshirt and said, Okay, I'll do it, but I have conditions. And just like that, the deal began. They moved fast. A rented townhouse was arranged, tailored outfits delivered, fake backstories created. Julian was meticulous. He provided Isla with every detail she'd need to play the perfect role. Their love story, shared memories, favorite songs. She memorized them all. But what he didn't plan for was how naturally she fit into his life. At the first Publix event, a charity brunch hosted by a rival CEO, Isla stunned everyone. She wore a sleek navy dress, her hair pulled back in a loose twist, and when she looped her arm through Julian's, it looked right. The whispers started immediately. Julian Blake, finally settling down? Who's the mystery woman? Julian played his part with flawless ease, but Isla surprised him again. She was graceful, charming, and disarmingly quick-witted. When someone asked how they met, she smiled and said, "At a coffee shop. I gave him terrible advice about his order. He kept coming back anyway." Julian laughed genuinely, and for the first time he realized the line between fiction and truth was already beginning to blur. Days turned into weeks. Isla became part of his world. She challenged him, questioned him, and once even laughed at his taste in furniture. She brought life into his quiet home, plants on windowsills, music in the kitchen, laughter echoing off cold walls. One evening, as they rehearsed their first dance for the upcoming gala, Julian caught himself watching her too long. She looked up, caught his gaze, and smiled softly. "You okay?" she asked. He nodded, but he wasn't. Something was changing. He felt it. He didn't want to admit it, but he was starting to care. Isla, too, found herself caught off guard. She had taken the job for the money she desperately needed to help her younger brother get into a special program for kids with autism. But now, late at night, when she sat alone in the bedroom next to Julian's, she found herself thinking about him, not the Julian who paid her, but the one who once stayed up with her all night when her brother was hospitalized, the one who bought an old piano because she mentioned she missed playing. She reminded herself that it wasn't real. Couldn't be, but it was getting harder to remember why. The night of the gala arrived like a storm. Cameras, lights, elegant gowns, and whispers surrounded them. Julian's mother, Evelyn, was at the center of it all, a woman whose gaze could cut glass. Isla met her with the same quiet strength she carried in the cafe. She didn't flinch, didn't falter. Afterward, as the night faded and the world fell silent again, Julian stood by the fireplace in their shared townhouse. Isla approached him barefoot, holding 2 mugs of cocoa. She handed him one and asked, "How did I do?" Julian didn't answer immediately. He looked at her, really looked at her, and said, "You didn't just convince them. You convinced me." There was a pause. A long one. Something heavy hung between them. "But remember," he added, his voice quieter, "this isn't real." Isla nodded, but her eyes betrayed her. Something had changed. Neither of them said what they were both thinking. But in that silence, the truth began to bloom, and neither of them would ever be the same again. ChatGPT said, "The rain began lightly that morning, tapping on the windows like a quiet reminder that not everything could be planned. Isla woke up earlier than usual, drawn by the sound of it and the soft golden hue slipping through the curtains. She sat on the edge of the bed, wrapped in a blanket, listening to the peaceful rhythm of the world outside. The townhouse, usually so pristine and composed, felt oddly alive today. Down the hallway, Julian was already up, reading the business section of the paper he no longer trusted but still read every morning. He glanced up when she entered, dressed in an oversized sweater and wool socks, holding her mug like it was her last anchor to reality. He said nothing at first, but his eyes followed her with a quiet curiosity. It wasn't the first time he noticed the way she filled the space, not just physically but with her presence. Her energy seemed to settle the air, to make things warmer, simpler. "Morning," she said, pouring herself some coffee. "You should be sleeping in," he replied. "You earned it after last night." She smiled faintly. Your mother smiled at me. I'm not sure if it was approval or a warning. With her, it's usually both. They shared a quiet laugh. It was happening more often now. These small moments of connection that neither of them wanted to name. The roles they were playing had become second nature, but beneath the surface, something far more dangerous had begun to take root. Authenticity. Later that day, Isla found herself alone in Julian's study, flipping through one of the photo albums his assistant had put together for their relationship history. It was part of the act, carefully edited images to support their love story. But tucked among the staged photos was a real one. Julian and his younger sister, smiling in front of a carousel, long before suits and pressure had taken over his life. Isla touched the photo gently, wondering who that version of Julian had been. He found her there minutes later, and for once his voice was soft. That was in Italy. I was 19. It was the last time I remember laughing without measuring what it would cost me. She turned to him, surprised by the admission. You used to be different. Didn't we all? There was silence again, not awkward, just thick with things unsaid. Isla set the photo down. I like that version of you. Julian didn't reply, but something in his expression shifted. It wasn't that he didn't feel. He simply didn't know how to anymore. Over the next few weeks, their lives began to blend in strange and unexpected ways. Isla accompanied him to meetings, not because she had to, but because he asked. They shared dinners that were no longer just about appearance. They talked late into the night, about dreams, regrets, childhood stories they had never shared with anyone else. She told him about her brother Ethan, and how everything she did was for him. Julian listened carefully, even arranging for a specialist to review Ethan's school applications. Isla didn't thank him with words. She simply touched his hand one evening quietly, and Julian understood it meant more than anything she could have said. But not everyone was convinced by the illusion they were building. Derek Blake, Julian's cousin and the closest thing he had to a rival, began asking questions. He smiled too widely at Isla, tried too hard to catch them in inconsistencies. One evening, during a company dinner, Derek leaned in and said, You're either a great actress or Julian's lost his edge. Isla didn't blink. Maybe both. It was the first time Julian realized just how fiercely she protected him, even when he didn't ask her to. But for all the performances, the polished smiles and perfectly executed roles, something undeniable was growing in the quiet moments between them. The way Isla made tea for him when he worked late. The way Julian found himself reaching for her hand during events, not because anyone was watching, but because it felt right. One night, everything changed again. They had just returned from a foundation banquet. Julian looked worn out, his tie loosened, jacket slung over his arm. Isla poured him a glass of water, and for the first time she hesitated before walking away. He caught her hand, held it for a second longer than necessary. Do you ever wish this was real? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. She froze. Do you? I don't know, he said, but it's getting harder to remember that it's not. Her breath caught, not from surprise, but from how much she had already felt the same. She stepped closer, her eyes meeting his. I think, she said softly, that pretending has become the easy part. It's stopping that's going to hurt. They didn't kiss. They didn't confess anything beyond that moment. But something passed between them, an invisible thread that tied them closer than any contract ever could. Still, reality doesn't pause for love, especially one born from a lie. A week later, Isla received a letter. Her brother's admission into the special needs program had been accepted. It was everything she had hoped for, but it came with a reminder: the end date of their deal was nearing. Julian noticed something shift in her. She became quieter, more distant, and it terrified him more than he expected. He had spent years building a life that required no one. Now he couldn't imagine mornings without her humming in the kitchen, evenings without her laughter echoing through the hallways. One night, as she packed a small bag to visit her brother. For a weekend, Julian stood in the doorway, unsure of what to say. "Do you really have to go?" he asked. She turned, brushing hair behind her ear. "It's just a few days. I promised Ethan." "That's not what I meant," he said quietly. She looked at him, eyes searching. But neither of them had the courage to say what they really wanted to. As she walked out the door, Julian felt something he hadn't in a long time. Fear. Not of losing a deal, not of losing power, but of losing her. In that moment, he realized he didn't want the story to end. He wanted it to begin. But by the time Isla returned, everything would be different. ChatGPT said, the train station felt colder than Isla remembered. She stepped onto the platform with a tired smile, suitcase in hand, heart full from the time spent with her brother. Ethan had hugged her tighter than usual when she left, as if sensing something she hadn't yet spoken aloud. The program was everything she'd dreamed of for him, safe, nurturing, hopeful. But it also marked a new chapter, a quiet reminder that her reason for agreeing to Julian's arrangement was slowly dissolving. The moment she walked back into the townhouse, it didn't feel like returning to a fake life. It felt like coming home. There was a faint smell of cedar and cinnamon in the air, like someone had lit her favorite candle. Her slippers were still by the door. A fresh bouquet of lilies, her favorite, waited on the entry table. Julian wasn't in sight, but his presence lingered in every carefully placed detail. She stepped into the living room and found a note on the coffee table in his precise handwriting. "Welcome back. I hope your heart is a little lighter." Dinner at 7? Simple, thoughtful, unexpected. She stood there for a moment, stunned by how much she missed him. Not just the man she saw at events, but the quiet version who stayed up late to make her laugh, who learned how she took her tea without asking. At exactly 7, she walked into the dining room to find Julian not in a tailored suit, but in a soft navy sweater and dark jeans. The table was set with candles, and in place of a personal chef's usual delicacies, there were 2 plates of pasta that looked suspiciously homemade. He smiled sheepishly. "Don't get your hopes up. I followed a recipe and almost set off the alarm." She sat down, laughing. "It smells incredible, and even if it doesn't taste that way, I appreciate the effort." They ate, slowly, comfortably. The conversation wandered through memories, music, books they loved. The tension that had lingered before her trip was gone, replaced with a fragile warmth that neither of them wanted to name too soon. But eventually, the conversation circled back to what they both had been avoiding. "How was Ethan?" Julian asked, twirling his fork but not looking up. "Happy, excited. It's everything he deserves." She paused, then added, "Thanks to you. You did that, Isla, not me." "No," she said gently. "You helped more than you know." A long silence followed. The candlelight flickered, casting soft shadows around them. "Julian," she began, "we both knew this wasn't meant to last, that it was temporary." "I know," he said, barely audible, "but I'm starting to wish it wasn't." He looked up sharply, emotion flickering across his face, hope, doubt, something unspoken. "So am I," he admitted, voice rough. "But I don't know how to turn this into something real without risking everything." She reached across the table, fingers brushing his. Maybe risking everything is the only way to know it's real. That night, they didn't rush. They simply sat together, close but not tangled, quietly choosing not to run anymore. The boundaries of their contract were fading, line by line. But just as hope began to bloom between them, the first ripple of trouble arrived. Julian's assistant, Lena, knocked on his office door the next morning holding a thick manila envelope. "This came in anonymously," she said. "It's about her." He opened it carefully. Inside were photographs. Isla at the cafe, Isla at the townhouse, and a typed sheet of paper that said only, "She's not who she says she is, and neither are you." Julian's stomach sank. He stared at the images, all innocuous but unsettling when taken out of context. He'd expected pushback, maybe From Derek, maybe from board members still loyal to his mother. But this was different. This felt personal. He didn't tell Isla. Not yet. He couldn't. Not without proof. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and it grew quickly. Later that day, as Isla brought him coffee and leaned against his office door, Julian forced a smile. "You okay?" she asked. "Just tired," he said. But the warmth in his voice didn't reach his eyes. That evening, Isla found the envelope tucked under a stack of documents in Julian's office. She hadn't meant to snoop. She had been looking for a book he'd lent her. But when her fingers brushed the edge of the folder and curiosity got the better of her, what she found knocked the wind out of her. The photos, the note, the look in Julian's eyes suddenly made sense. He didn't trust her. He hadn't told her. The old fear returned. The one she'd buried deep when she first agreed to the arrangement. The fear that no matter how close they became, she would always be a girl from a small cafe pretending to belong in his world. She put the envelope back exactly where she found it, and said nothing. The next few days passed like a quiet storm. Smiles remained, but they were thinner. Conversations shorter. Isla noticed Julian working later, distracted more often. He, in turn, noticed the softness in her eyes begin to dull. One night, she finally asked him, "Do you think this was ever real? Or did we just get good at pretending?" He looked at her for a long moment, then said, "I want it to be real, I do." "But?" she asked. "But I don't know how to trust what I feel anymore." That night she couldn't sleep. She stood at the window watching the lights of the city flicker like uncertain stars. Julian was asleep on the couch, exhausted from another late meeting. She studied him, wondering if she had made a mistake letting her heart hope. The next morning, she was gone. No note, no goodbye. Just a single envelope left on his desk. Inside was a photo, not one of the fake ones, but one of the two of them, taken without either of them knowing, during a street festival weeks earlier. He was laughing, and Isla was looking up at him with an expression so full of unguarded affection that it made his chest tighten. On the back she had written, "For one moment it was real. I'll never forget it." Julian read the message over and over, and for the first time since they met, he realized something. He didn't just want her to stay, he needed her to. But by the time he rushed out the door to find her, she had already disappeared. The city felt louder without her. Julian stood at the corner of the cafe where he'd first seen Isla, alone, windswept, hopeful. Now, all that remained was the hollow ache of her absence. People passed by, indifferent, unaware that his world had tilted the moment she walked out of it. In his hand, he still held the photo she'd left behind, the edges softening from how often he'd turned it over. He didn't understand how someone could leave and still take all the warmth with them. Every room in the townhouse echoed with silence now. Her humming in the mornings, her laughter bouncing off the kitchen tiles, the faint scent of her favorite lavender soap, all of it gone. And for the first time, Julian realized something terrifying. He hadn't just lost her. He had pushed her away. It was late when Lena entered his office with hesitant footsteps. "Julian, I did some digging about the envelope." He looked up, his expression hard. "And?" It wasn't Derek. It wasn't even someone from the board. She slid a file across the desk. "It was your mother." The words hit him. Like ice water, she hired a private firm months ago, had them watch Isla, gather anything they could twist against her. She's been playing a long game, trying to dismantle the one thing she couldn't control. You. Julian closed his eyes, jaw tightening. "And I fell right into it." Lena hesitated. "There's more. Isla never hid anything. She didn't have a record, no hidden agenda, nothing suspicious. She just worked hard, loved her brother, tried to keep up with a world that wasn't made for someone like her." Guilt burned in Julian's chest. He had doubted her. He had let silence say things he never meant. He was a man who once believed love was a distraction. Now it was the only thing that mattered. and he had broken it with his own hands. He stood abruptly. Find out where she went. It won't be easy, Lena said. She didn't leave a trace. Then I'll look everywhere, he replied. I'm not letting her go without telling her the truth. Isla sat in a quiet seaside town, nearly 200 miles away, the wind tangling her hair as she stared out over the waves. The ocean had always been her escape, limitless, honest, untamed. It didn't ask for perfection, it didn't expect lies. She worked mornings at a tiny bookstore near the pier, the kind where no one asked questions. She spent evenings writing, letters she never sent, tucked into a journal she kept beneath her pillow. Letters to Julian. I miss how you used to look at me when you thought I wasn't watching. I wish we had met in another life, where pretending wasn't necessary. I wanted to stay. I really did. But the truth was, Isla didn't leave because she stopped loving him. She left because she loved him too much to stay in a place where she was doubted. Her heart hadn't stopped aching since. One afternoon, while shelving novels, with weathered spines and handwritten price tags, she heard the soft chime of the bell above the door. She turned, and there he was. Julian, windblown, breathless. His coat half open, eyes searching. For a moment neither spoke. She felt like the breath had been knocked from her lungs. I didn't know if I'd ever find you, he said finally, voice shaking. You shouldn't have come, she whispered. Maybe not, but I couldn't stay there knowing I broke something that mattered more to me than anything else ever has. He stepped forward, holding out the photo she had left him. I kept this with me. Every day. I stared at it until I couldn't remember what pretending felt like, only what being with you felt like. Isla looked away, the tears threatening. I didn't lie to you, Julian. Not once. I know, he said. I know that now. My mother, she sent that envelope. I should have trusted you, I should have told you. Instead, I let silence speak for me. And now? Now I want to speak for myself, he said. No contracts, no roles, just me. He pulled out a small, folded paper from his coat pocket. She recognized it instantly. The original contract they had both signed when this all began. Julian held it up, then slowly tore it in half, and then again, and again, until the pieces fluttered like snow to the wooden floor. I don't want the woman who agreed to pretend to love me, he said. I want the woman who did it anyway. A single tear rolled down Isla's cheek. She stepped toward him slowly, unsure, vulnerable. You still have to deal with your mother, she said, voice trembling. I don't care, he whispered. Let her try. I've built companies, empires, but nothing compares to what we built in that townhouse. What we built without even meaning to. Silence filled the bookstore, soft and sacred. Finally, Isla whispered. Then say it. Say what? What you came here to tell me. Julian stepped closer, cupping her face with both hands. That I love you, he said. And not just in the way people love ideas, or comfort, or memories. I love you like the only thing I've ever been sure of. She closed her eyes, then opened them, smiled through her tears, and said, You took your time. I was afraid, he admitted. So was I. But I'm not anymore. And in the quiet corners of a forgotten bookstore, two hearts, once lost in pretense and doubt, found the kind of truth that didn't need explaining. Not in words. Not in vows. Just in the steady, silent rhythm of finally coming home. Rain tapped softly against the glass windows of the small bookstore. Isla leaned against Julian's shoulder, the steady beat of his heart calming the storm that had once raged. Inside her, for the first time in what felt like forever, there was no pretending, no uncertainty, no contract holding them together, just truth, just choice. Julian had stayed in the quiet seaside town for 3 days. He didn't ask Isla to come back immediately. He simply showed up every morning with coffee from the little corner cafe, walked her to work, helped shelve books, and asked nothing in return except her time. They talked. About their fears, their pasts, their hopes for a future neither of them had dared to imagine. It was slow and fragile, like rebuilding something broken, piece by delicate piece. On the fourth morning, she met him outside before he could knock. "I'm by." "Ready to come home," she said. He didn't need to ask if she was sure. The way she said it, soft, steady, unshaking, told him everything. They drove back together, the long road a ribbon of quiet music and stolen glances. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't rushed. But there was a magic in the simplicity, two people choosing love again despite everything. When they arrived at the townhouse, something was different. The warmth wasn't just in the space. It was in how Julian looked at her, how he reached for her hand without hesitation, how Isla moved through the rooms not as a guest, but as someone returning to her place in the world. But peace never stays untouched for long. The next morning, Julian received a message from the Whitmore board. An emergency meeting had been called. Rumors had begun to spread. Leaks about the contract. Whispers about Isla's background. Questions about Julian's judgment. He expected it, but now he had something worth fighting for. At the boardroom, his mother sat at the head of the long table, her expression unreadable. "So," she said smoothly, "you've finally returned with your project." Julian didn't flinch. "Her name is Isla, and she's not a project. She's the woman I love." A ripple of murmurs passed through the board. His mother arched an eyebrow. "You once said love was weakness, that you wouldn't let it distract you. I was proud of that." "I was wrong," Julian replied. "Love isn't a distraction. It's clarity. And it's the only reason I've survived long enough to realize that this company doesn't own me." She leaned back, voice ice cold. "You signed a board agreement. Your actions reflect on all of us. You fabricated a relationship." "I didn't fabricate anything," Julian interrupted. "I made a mistake starting it the way I did, but the feelings became real. And if you think that disqualifies me from leading this company, then maybe it's time I walk away from it." Gasps echoed around the room. Julian stood calmly. "I built Whitmore Enterprises from the ground up after my father left. I've saved it from collapse more than once, and if loving someone discredits that, then maybe this board isn't worthy of what we've created." He turned to leave. But before he could step out, his mother's voice stopped him. "You think love will make you strong, but it will cost you everything." He paused, then said softly, "Then let it. Because I've already lived with nothing." And that was when I had no one. That night he returned to Isla with the weight of a decision resting on his shoulders. She watched him carefully. "Did it go badly?" He smiled, tired but peaceful. "I told them the truth. I told them if they couldn't accept who I am now, they didn't deserve me." "And what if they walk away?" she asked. Julian pulled her into his arms. "Then we build something new. Together." But the days ahead weren't easy. Articles began to appear online. Tabloids suggesting Isla had used Julian, whispers of gold digging, betrayal, manipulation. They stayed off social media, avoided. The headlines focused on what mattered. Still, the world outside crept in. One evening, Isla returned from a walk and found Julian in his office, staring at his laptop. The screen showed a headline: "CEO's love life sparks investor panic." She hesitated in the doorway. "Maybe I should disappear again." He looked up instantly. "Don't you dare." She stepped closer. "I don't want to be the reason. You lose everything." "You're not," he said, standing. "You're the reason I found something I never even realized I was missing." He walked her to the living room where, waiting on the table, was something unexpected. A worn box. Inside were photos from Julian's childhood. His mother, his father, birthday parties that felt staged, stiff holidays with fake smiles. At the bottom, a picture of him at 10 years old, standing in front of the family estate with wide eyes and a forced grin. "I kept this to remind myself of what I didn't want to become," he said. "But now I look at it, and I realize I don't have to carry it anymore." He handed the box to Isla. "Will you help me replace these?" With memories that matter? Her eyes brimmed with tears. Always. They spent that night printing new photos. Of the bookstore, the seaside town, the street festival where their love first bloomed unnoticed. Laughing, cutting, gluing, creating. And when Julian finally asked the question he'd been holding on to, for weeks it wasn't on a stage or under flashing lights. It was in their kitchen while Isla was sipping tea in his old college sweatshirt. He got down on one knee. Not for show, but because her love had humbled him. Isla, I didn't know who I was until you walked into my life and turned it upside down. I used to think love was something that would weaken me, but you've shown me it's the only thing that's ever made me strong. Will you marry me for real this time? No contracts. Just us. Always. She didn't hesitate. Yes, she whispered. 1,000 times yes. And for once there was no doubt. No secrets. Just love, raw, brave, and undeniably real. Snow drifted lightly onto the quiet city streets, frosting the trees and lampposts with a delicate white shimmer. Inside the old stone chapel on the edge of town, soft golden lights danced across the stained glass windows, painting the room with a warmth that felt more like a promise than decoration. There was no fanfare, no press, no headlines, just 30 people, close friends, a few co-workers, and one pair of eyes locked on the woman walking toward him, as if nothing else in the world existed. Julian stood at the altar, not as the billionaire CEO or the man who once believed feelings were liabilities, but as someone reborn in love. Isla walked slowly down the aisle, her dress simple, her hair loose, her smile trembling. And still, she looked like the most certain thing he'd ever seen. Every step she took toward him was one he had once feared, toward commitment, vulnerability, risk. But now, each step was a gift. When she reached him, she didn't take his hand right away. Instead, she looked into his eyes and whispered, "This time, I'm not pretending." "Neither am I," he replied. The vows were short, unscripted, spoken from the heart. "I don't promise you perfection," Julian said, his voice steady, "but I promise you honesty. A home. A love that fights with you, not against you. And I'll never let silence speak for me again." Isla's voice trembled as she replied, "I don't need wealth or status, or even answers to everything. I just need you to show up." And you did. You always did, even when you didn't know how. When they kissed, it was quiet, reverent, not for anyone else, just for them, and it felt like an ending. But also like a beautiful beginning. They didn't fly off to a private island or a secret honeymoon. Instead, they spent the first week of their marriage in a cabin Julian had found deep in the mountains. No signal, no media, no board meetings. Just a fireplace, mismatched mugs, a shelf of old books, and a couple trying to remember how it felt to simply be together. In the early mornings, they watched the fog roll in. In the afternoons, they cooked together. In the evenings, they talked, for hours, about dreams, childhood memories, even the parts of their story that still felt raw. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and that was more than either of them had ever hoped for. One evening, after Julian had stepped outside to gather firewood, Isla noticed a folder left on the coffee table, one from his briefcase, half open. She didn't mean to pry, but something inside nudged her. Inside were designs, business models, a brand new vision for a company, focused not on dominance but on impact, on people, on giving back. Attached to the top page was a note in Julian's handwriting. The Whitmore Foundation, in honor of Isla, for those who are overlooked, but never undeserving. She covered her mouth with her hand. Tears streamed down her cheeks. When Julian came back inside, cheeks flushed from the cold, he saw her holding the folder and froze. "I was going to surprise you," he said sheepishly. "This is what you've been working on late at night? I don't want to just rebuild our lives. I want to use what we've been through to make a difference, for kids like your brother, for people who get ignored because they don't wear the right clothes or speak the right way." She ran into his arms. This time, there were no words, just a fierce, grateful hug. Months passed. The foundation launched quietly but spread quickly. Stories began to circulate, not about scandal, but about scholarships, shelter programs, literacy initiatives, and youth art therapy centers funded across the city. Julian stepped back from his CEO role, not out of defeat, but choice. He handed the reins to someone he trusted, someone with vision and heart, and focused full-time on the foundation alongside Isla. And Isla? She didn't disappear into the background. She ran her own creative program, taught storytelling to underprivileged children, and published a small book of poems she had written during her hardest days. One of them read, "We are not made of what breaks us. We are made of what we choose to build after." Years later, at a community event hosted by the foundation, a little girl tugged on Isla's dress. "Are you the lady who used to be poor and then married a prince?" Isla knelt beside her and smiled. "No, sweetheart. I married a man who thought he didn't need love, until he realized love was the only thing that made life worth living." The girl tilted her head. "Is that better than a prince?" Isla glanced across the room where Julian was tying a child's shoelace and laughing without a care in the world. "Yes," she whispered, "much better." And so, their story became not just a tale of transformation, but a testament to what happens when two broken people stop pretending, start believing, and build something lasting, not out of convenience, but out of courage. They began as strangers in a contract. They became partners in healing. And in the end, they chose love. Imperfect, honest, powerful love every single day.